I'd like to compare the experiences I had with two relatively recent open-world games, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Subnautica. Breath of the Wild is a much more traditional open-world game, and its map design uses some very standard methods of guiding the player towards locations that will progress the plot. There are towers across the map that will reveal new areas, and a mini-map where you can mark destinations and see terrain details, even in places you haven't visited yet. And most importantly, the game provides you with vistas that let you see where you want to go, whether it's a divine beast on the horizon, a tower or nearby shrine to conquer, or just a huge mountain begging to be climbed. There are always many choices of where to go next, and it's hard to make a wrong choice or go somewhere you really shouldn't. In contrast, let's look at a moment I had while playing Subnautica for the first time. I was about 200 meters down, my health, food, and water were maxed out, and in my Seamoth submarine I didn't have to worry about running out of oxygen. There was nothing anywhere near me. Besides the HUD and the Seamoth I was in, the game was almost literally rendering 0 polygons. All I could see in any direction was the murky blue-green of the ocean around me. Nothing in the scene could harm me in the slightest. But nevertheless, I felt so lost and so scared that I had to turn around and run like a coward back to the safety of my life pod. I had known where I was going at the time, and I thought I could save some effort by taking the shortest path through, instead of hugging the ocean floor and risking annoying attacks from the local sharks. But Subnautica refuses to give me the tools I'd need to make this plan work. There is no minimap, no HUD markers helping me find my destination, and no on-screen pop-ups telling me when I arrived at the Grand Reef. Instead, the game provided me with skin-crawling ambient music and a very justifiable fear that the Reaper Leviathan would pop out of nowhere and attack. This video is going to investigate further the dynamics of wayfinding in Subnautica, looking at the tools provided to the player and the affordances that are taken away, in order to see why the world of Subnautica is so much more visceral than the hand-holding traditional open worlds of Zelda or Skyrim. The immediate difference here is Subnautica's fog and decreased view distance. In Breath of the Wild, we can see Death Mountain from more than 4 miles away on the Grand Plateau. Landmarks like these are referred to as weenies, a term coined by Walt Disney when he was designing the layouts of Disney theme parks. A weenie is a big landmark visible from across the map that helps with wayfinding, orientation, and as a destination that the player can work towards. These are all over the place in most open-world games, whether it's lookout towers, big mountains, or lasers all pointing towards some central location. But Subnautica doesn't let you see much more than 80 or 100 meters in front of you underwater, refusing to let the concept of a weenie take hold. And above water, there's really only one landmark to speak of, your crashed ship, the Aurora. In fact, the game even specifically obfuscates the 2 islands behind big masses of clouds to stop players from finding them too early in the game. Before we move on to discuss how wayfinding does work in Subnautica, it's worth looking a bit closer at how the game treats the Aurora. Although visiting it is a major plot point, the game prevents you from focusing on it too early. Your PDA warns you away from the ship early on, and then half the ship explodes, leaving a zone of radiation that's impassable without proper protection. Radiation or not, the area around the crash zone is barren and desolate, and most players who stray in the wrong direction will have a terrifying introduction to the Reaper Leviathan. These mechanics serve 2 purposes. First, it's a very real warning to the players that they shouldn't go somewhere they aren't completely prepared for. Exploring the Aurora comes with a whole host of difficulties, and it isn't hard to drown or get attacked by crabs if you don't come equipped. Secondly, the presence of Reaper Leviathans here is very intentional. If you don't know exactly the right paths, it's hard not to become Reaper lunch when you get too close, and even just seeing one is a terrifying experience the first time. This early introduction will teach the player that danger might lurk behind every layer of fog on this planet, and escape won't always be possible. Establishing these real consequences early on adds a layer of gravity and fear to exploration that just doesn't happen in a game where you can see everything from far away, or when enemies are just an opportunity for more loot and XP. So now that we understand the difficulty and fear that Subnautica adds to its exploration, how do you actually find your way around the map? There aren't any weenies to orient yourself towards a destination other than the Aurora. There's no mini-map to highlight points of interest, and you can never see anything farther than 100 meters away from you. The only inherent wayfinding mechanics in the game are HUD pop-ups that show you the location of your life pod, vehicles, and some of the other crashed life pods early in the game. These serve as your initial exploration hooks in the first few hours, and it's mostly safe to follow those right to the destination. They pull you just a little bit further away than early players will roam on their own, and far enough into dangerous regions to add some fear and anticipation, but nothing really risky early on. And honestly, that's it. The game will hint at certain plot hooks that might be found deeper below sea level, and some of the lore will hint towards future locations, but the game doesn't provide any obvious paths to those locations or guides on what you'll find there. You're marooned on an unexplored alien planet, and the only way to progress is to take a deep breath and plunge in. But once you do start exploring, the real payoff for taking all these tools away begins to appear. Exploring a new area is undeniably terrifying. You never know what you'll find, and the looming threat of a Leviathan-class creature never goes away. But as you explore farther and farther, the area that you recognize and can feel safe in will grow and grow. You start to remember the terrain, and you'll create trails of these landmarks to help you navigate from place to place. A tall rock here, a certain shape of plant there, a valley here, and a chasm there. You define your own breadcrumbs and landmarks until the path from Life Pod 5 to the Lost River is as familiar as the back of your hand. After 20 or 30 hours in the game, environments that were once too scary to navigate alone are now your free space to roam and build. What was once a constantly looming fear of Leviathans becomes a respect for the spaces they live in, and a freedom in the spaces they don't. As you become more familiar with the landscape, your fear of the unknown will transform into a mastery over the known, and it's only because you've spent time in this world. This acquired familiarity with the landscape is a level of mastery over an environment that is impossible to recreate in a game that gives you a minimap or obvious landmarks. There's no mechanics or game progression to mediate your relationship with Planet 4546b. It's just you and the open world. Not every game will be able to follow Subnautica's example with their open worlds. The design relies on Subnautica's focus on exploration, non-linear storytelling, and a lot of playtesting analytics to understand where players will and won't go without obvious guidance. Requiring this kind of dedication to exploration can be alienating for some types of players, and it adds that element of terror that Subnautica benefits from, but other games might want to avoid. But wherever it can fit, I'd like to see this type of unforgiving open world more often. It draws the player into a game's world in a way that's impossible to recreate with hand-holding wayfinding mechanics, and creates an unforgettable experience for the player. I couldn't find my way anywhere in Breath of the Wild or The Witcher 3 without looking at a map, but even 3 years after I last visited Planet 4546b, I can still navigate anywhere I please.